Greetings. So I wanted to give you an example of what this looks like. And so I just went on PubMed and I pulled up a study that, is particularly relevant in the psychedelic space right now. So this study was published in Nature Medicine. This is the MAPS study that most folks know about, looking at MDMA-assisted therapy for moderate to severe PTSD. And this was a randomized placebo-controlled phase 3 trial. So if we think about our level of evidence pyramid, that's going to be, pretty high up on the pyramid. So right here on the first page, we're seeing the title, we're seeing the authors listed, and we're seeing that abstract that I mentioned, that one paragraph summary of the study. It's always a good idea to take a look at the authors of a study, especially if you're reading a publication that you're interested in. You might want to know who conducted this, where is this work being conducted, and then, have they done anything else in this space? So this study, I happen to know, we're seeing Rick Doblin right here. The study was conducted at MAPS. All right, so if we zoom in again, here we've got the study title, the study authors, and here's the study abstract. Oftentimes, an abstract also follows a template, and it follows the same kind of template or format as primary literature does. So we're going to see an introduction, a methods, a results, and a discussion and conclusion. Now, I've added in these little section titles here just to help you identify. But so the introduction, this is a multi-site, randomized, double-blind, confirmatory phase 3 study that evaluated the efficacy and safety of MDMA therapy versus placebo with identical therapy in participants with moderate to severe PTSD. Okay, so it's just a brief summary of the intro, which is really just what they're doing. In the methods, we see changes in clinician-administered PTSD scale for the DSM-5, which is the CAPS-5 Total Severity Score, and Sheehan Disability Scale Functional Impairment Score were assessed by blinded independent assessors. Participants were randomized to receive MDMA-assisted therapy or placebo with therapy. And we're seeing that there were 53 participants in the MDMA-assisted therapy group and 51 in the placebo therapy group. So that's a fully powered study. We're going to have statistical significance in our findings if they are there. And they're looking at changes in the clinician-administered PTSD scale as well as the Sheehan Disability Scale. Then we're going to move on to, so that just gives us an overview of the methods, right? It doesn't give us all of the information that we need. For example, one big one that I notice is it doesn't say what the placebo was or what the therapy was, but it gives us just a taste. So then we move into the results section, and they're saying overall 26.9% or 28 out of 104 participants, so these are all participants, had moderate PTSD, and 73% of the participants had severe PTSD. Usually the first thing you're going to see in the results section are just basic demographics, right? So that's what we're seeing here. Participants were ethno-racially diverse. 26.9% identified as Hispanic or Latino, and 33.7% identified as other than white. So again, this is just our basic demographic information. Least squares means changes in CAPS-5 score was negative 23.7 for the MDMA-assisted therapy group versus negative 14.8 for the placebo with therapy group. And the p-value was 0.001, the Cohen's d was 0.7. So again, we're seeing a significantly greater reduction in the CAPS-5 score in the MDMA-assisted therapy group than was observed in the placebo therapy group. The LS mean changes in SDS score was negative 3.3 for the MDMA-assisted therapy group as compared to negative 2.1 for the placebo therapy group, and the p-value for that was 0.03. So 0.03 is still less than 0.05, so we would consider that, I'm assuming they set their significance level at 0.05, we would consider that statistically significant. So MDMA-assisted therapy also resulted in statistically significant improvements in SDS scores as compared to placebo with therapy. There were no deaths or serious TEAEs. So AE refers to adverse event. I'm not sure what TEAE refers to here. Usually they would identify that. So we can read the paper to find out. And then after this, we're going to see the discussion and conclusion section, which says these data suggest that MDMA-assisted therapy reduced PTSD symptoms and functional impairment in a diverse population with moderate to severe PTSD and was generally well tolerated. So that's that's more of a conclusion statement than a discussion section statement. But again, you only get a paragraph. We have word limits. We only get a sentence. And then at the very end here, they were showing us, I'm not able to navigate back, they're showing us the funding that they got. So then when we look into the actual paper, I'm just kind of doing a screen share here, we'll see our actual introduction and background section, which is going to just fill in a little bit more information. Then we're getting into our results right away. Now, you'll remember I said that the template or the format usually goes intro and background and then methods. Sometimes certain journals will have the method section at the end of the article, and this is the case for this one. But we're starting with the intro and background section. Then we can skip down to the end of the study and see the methods section, which is pretty large. Usually you'll see a consort or a prisma diagram like this, which is just kind of giving you a diagram of the study. So they recruited 324 participants. They also screened that many. 203 were excluded. 121 were enrolled. They were randomly assigned to the MDMA-assisted therapy group or the placebo. In the MDMA-assisted therapy group, 53 participants completed experimental session number 2, and 53 completed the T3 endpoint, which just means that they retained all of their participants throughout the study. In the placebo group, 51 participants were randomized to that group, and it looks like maybe one discontinued due to an adverse event. So that's kind of interesting. The adverse event was in the placebo group, not the MDMA-assisted therapy group. And then 53 participants completed experimental session 3, 52 completed the T4 endpoint, 1 chose to discontinue the treatment. Here at session 3, 43 stayed in, so they retained all participants. 1 completed visit but had a missing CAPS 5. And then at the end, 52 participants completed the study and were included in the analysis, and here 43 were. So then if we go back up to the results section, I've kind of made the results section smaller here, and I've shown you're going to see quite a few tables in the results section. So we've got this table 1 that really just reports on demographic data of all the participants, and you'll see the MDMA-assisted therapy group and control. This can enable us to check on our own that the demographics were relatively even across both groups. And then we're seeing the adverse events that occurred during treatment for both groups, the MDMA-assisted therapy and the placebo with therapy. So again, we can make our own comparisons here. More results. So I generally, when I'm reading a results section, I'll really focus on the figures and the tables, right? Because that's what the authors have identified as the most important, which is why they're presenting it visually. So here we're looking at measures of efficacy in the MDMA-assisted therapy and placebo with therapy groups. And we're seeing time on the x-axis here. So baseline, session 1, session 2, session 3. It looks like our red markers are going to be our MDMA-assisted therapy markers. Our blue is going to be our placebo. And here we're looking at CAPS 5 scales on the y-axis. Down here we're looking at SDS on the y-axis. And you can see that these scores are significantly lower in the MDMA group, though they're the same at baseline. So the mean scores were the same at baseline, and then we saw significantly greater reductions in these scores in the MDMA-assisted therapy group at all 3 sessions. And it looks like actually the difference was not significant maybe in session 1, but was in session 2 and session 3. Then if we move on to figure 3, we're looking at treatment responses and remission in the MDMA-assisted therapy and placebo with therapy groups. So treatment responses. And again, here we're seeing after session 1, session 2, session 3, we're going to see the same thing over here in this red graph. And I take that back, actually here blue, we're looking at the placebo with therapy, red, we're looking at MDMA-assisted therapy, and we've got participants here. So treatment responses, and we're looking at gray are non-responders, light blue are responders. This middle blue are loss of diagnosis, so they fully responded and no longer had a diagnosis, no longer met the diagnostic criteria, and then here folks who are in remission. And we're looking at the same thing here in the MDMA group, right? So As we're kind of going through primary research, we're going to scan the intro background, the methods. We just want to get a quick overview, and then we're going to kind of focus on the figures that are represented in the results. And then we're seeing the discussion section. And so here they don't have, any kind of subsections, but their discussion section is here, and it's going to kind of hit all those different points that I addressed. And then here we're seeing our formality statements, right? So there's some online content if we want a little bit more, their acknowledgments, their author contributions, their competing interests, so potential conflicts of interest.